First story. Windermere, United Kingdom, 1982. Helen, 16, arrives to babysit 3 children for a young couple out for the evening. They inform her the kids are already in bed and won't be home until late. As she sits on the sofa in the large house, she opens a book. The phone rings, but when she answers, there's silence. A few minutes later it rings again and a chilling voice says, "Have you gone to see the children?" Then, silence. Assuming it's the father checking in, she thinks the call was cut off and expects him to call back. Shortly after, the phone rings again. "Have you gone to see the children?" she repeats. "Mr. Stewart?" she asks, worried, but there's no response. Concerned, she calls the restaurant where her employers are, learning they left 10 minutes ago. She contacts the police, but they say they can do nothing about prank calls. The stranger calls again. "Why didn't you go see the children?" Terrified, she contacts the police again, insisting the stranger is nearby. The agent reassures her and promises to trace the call next time. Helen turns off the living room lights, locks herself in the kitchen, and the phone rings again. This time she answers immediately. "What do you want from me?" The chilling voice responds, "Why did you turn off the lights? Who are you? What do you want? I see you, you know." "Okay. You scared me. Are you happy?" she says. "No. What I want is to bathe in your blood." Helen hangs up abruptly, terrified, but the phone rings again. "Let me!" she screams. "Helen, it's me. We've traced the call. Come out right away. The call comes from one of the rooms in the house. Get out immediately." She rushes to the door, trembling, unlocking it. Panicking, she drops the key, picks it up and hears a noise behind her. She sees a door open at the top of the stairs, light from the children's room revealing a man's silhouette. Finally unlocking the door, she throws herself out, encountering police officers with weapons on the landing. Immediately assisted, she turns around to see the killer, now handcuffed and covered in the blood of the Stewart children. Second story. It was a dark and foggy night. Denise struggled to stay awake and the road was wet. The gas level was dangerously low and she had no idea where the next town was. Just as she was about to stop the car to sleep on the side of the road, she spotted a small, decrepit gas station. She pulled over. The clerk seemed distracted by the back of the car while she asked him to fill up the gas. Eventually complying, he then asked her to open the hood because he detected a problem. Denise's heart raced. Alone in a small, grimy gas station in the middle of nowhere, the clerk's behaviour seemed odd. He asked her to get out of the car to examine the engine. She complied, wondering why she didn't start screaming. As soon as she stood in front of the car, he grabbed her arm and said, "This car needs a tow truck. You have to come with me to the office." Then he covered her mouth and forcefully dragged her into the office. Once inside, he told her, "There is a man lying in the back seat of your car. We should call for help." Frightened, she sprinted towards her car and sped away. After a few minutes, Denise looked in her rearview mirror. She saw a man with a hoodie and an axe in his hand in the back seat. With a swing of his arm, he decapitated the poor woman. Denise's body was found a few days later. Years after this tragedy, the police finally managed to catch the serial killer. Third story. A few days before Christmas 1995, in the Mayfair district of London, David McCallum approached 2 15-year-old schoolboys and asked them to come to his house to listen to heavy metal. The 2 teenagers, Michael Earridge and Stephen Cullen, addicted to this music, accepted the invitation and followed this new friend, a few years their senior. Once there, Michael and Stephen noticed that David lived in an indescribable mess, where Iron Maiden and Metallica records rubbed shoulders with a mountain of books, all dedicated to the serial killer Charles Manson. In the centre of the room stood an altar draped in black and decorated at each end with tall lit candles. To his guests, somewhat taken aback, McCallum explained in a peaceful tone, "This altar is that of Satan. My friend Dennis and I worship the devil. It allows us to communicate with missing people through the Ouija board." Smiling, he pointed to the game board placed at the foot of the altar and suggested playing a game of Ouija. Intrigued, Michael and Stephen accepted. Dennis arrived, and the 4 young people took their place, seated on the floor around the Ouija board. According to custom, everyone placed a hand on the mobile triangle placed in the centre of the game. Almost immediately, the strangely hoarse voice of McCallum broke the silence. "Satan, if you are among us, give us your orders. Dictate your wishes, Satan. What do you want me to do?" McCallum suddenly got up, grabbed young Michael by the arm, and threw him on the bed where he immobilized him. Then, with a combat knife in his hand, he savagely stabbed his victim. The long, sharp blade fell 11 times on the body of the unfortunate boy. Dennis, who was holding Stephen down as best he could, screaming in fear, finally shouted at McCallum, "Stop, David, just stop! He is dead!" With a start, Stephen managed to free himself and escaped at full speed. Left alone, David and Dennis wrapped the corpse in a sheet and a blanket. They decided to transport it in the trunk of their car, and they would dispose of it in a public dump. Arrested shortly after on the information provided by the survivor of the killing, it turned out that the two Satan worshippers were already the subject of a double psychiatric and police investigation. During his court appearance, David explained that voices transmitted by the Ouija had pushed him to commit his crime. The judges had him locked up for life in Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric hospital. They sentenced his accomplice to 10 years of imprisonment in another psychiatric establishment. The last one? The guest that no one invited. One evening, a few guests gathered around a meal. There were 6 of them and had just taken their seats when they heard a knock on the door. They weren't expecting anyone, but the hostess went to open the door to see who it could be. There was no one. "Someone must have had the wrong address," she explained to her guests. But when their attention returned to the table, a 7th place setting had been set. "Was it there before?" asked one of the guests. "I must have put an extra place setting by mistake," the hostess replied. She took it back to the kitchen, but when she returned, it was there again, this time with a drink next to it. As they chatted, the other guests didn't notice anything. But upon seeing this, they were so shocked that they didn't know what to do. They then decided that the best strategy was to play the game. They filled the empty glass and plate so as not to upset this mysterious guest that no one had invited.